everybody. Welcome to an emergency podcast edition of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I am Brian Nimhauser. You know all the places you can find me at Hawk Blogger, and I'm going to get right to it. Although my pal Finn is sitting here. Do you want to say hi, Finn? Here, Finn. Come here. Finn would like to join this episode to let you guys know what's going on with the Hawks. So I did a prediction show this morning, if you were there for it, and guess what? I was right and I was wrong. And I'm always going to be here to tell you when I'm wrong. So Finn's got very excited. We might have to move him out of here. But I appreciate the Seahawks making their first wave of roster moves after I had finished my workout so I could come right over here and talk with all of you about it. Yes, if you have not heard, the news is out. The Seahawks have released. They have released Roy Robertson-Harris, defensive tackle slash defensive end. They have released George Fant, the offensive tackle. They have released Rayshawn Jenkins, the safety. And they have released Dre'Mont Jones. The Dre'Mont Jones era is over almost as quickly as it began in Seattle. And with those four moves, the Seahawks have now cleared right around $27 million in cap space. So I doubt that over the cap has already updated, but let's take a look. Those guys are pretty fast. You never know. Look at that, dude. They've updated. As far as I can tell, it looks like all those moves are there, and it shows the Seahawks as now being $16 million under the cap. Doesn't that feel better? Doesn't that feel better? The Seahawks are $16 million under the cap, and there's more moves that they can make. So I'm going to talk to you about each of these moves quickly. I'm going to talk to you about what the roster, the depth chart looks like. And it might be surprising to see it in real living color as we go through that. And I'll talk to you about the moves that will likely come. So let's first recap. If you didn't tune into Hawk Blogger Mornings this morning, just a few hours ago, I went through my predictions about what was going to happen for each of these players. And what I ended up with, where I was right, I was correct on the Rayshawn Jenkins. I think anybody could have predicted that. That was going to happen. I don't think he was going to get trade interest. He didn't. They released him. That one move, for what it's worth, was around, I want to say around $5 million in cap. Now that he's gone, I think it doesn't show up. Let me see what that was. Does it show me? Probably doesn't. But in any event, Rayshawn Jenkins is gone. I was right about that. George Fant released. I was also right about that. And then we get to the things I was wrong about. And Dre'Mont Jones, I told you that was the hardest one for me to predict. I thought it made sense for them to let him go. I thought it made sense for them to try to trade him. I also thought there was a chance that the coaching staff felt like there was something there that they wanted to work with and that they didn't want to give up on it and that they might just restructure his deal. They could have saved around $9 million with that. With this move, I think they saved around $11 million with that restructure. So, yeah, I think not shocking. It was a really hard one to predict on that front. Most people would have guessed he was going to be cut for logical reasons, but coaching staffs don't always do what fans think are logical. So, I was wrong on that. The Roy Robertson-Harris one, I'm going to say TBD if I was right on that one. I'd said that they're going to kind of restructure. I knew they weren't going to pay him the contract that he had. I thought that they would potentially bring him back for less money, and that could still happen. So we'll see what happens there. I still like his fit on this team. We'll look at the roster here in just a second, and you'll see part of why I think it makes sense to have him around. But for now, he is off the team, and I think that cleared about $6 million in cap space as well. So the next question on everybody's mind is, Tyler Lockett was not on this list of 4 names that got cut. Does that mean that they're going to keep him? Uchenna Nwosu was not on this list of 4 names. Does that mean, everything's copacetic? Well, with Tyler Lockett, I believe what's happening there is similar to what, if you heard Brady Henderson today on Brock and Salk, I think he said it really well. with players that have had that kind of tenure on the team that the team wants to honor them, you're not just going to list him in kind of a news dump of every other player that you're cutting. You kind of give him special treatment. And so I think he'll have his own day to himself where they will make that announcement. I think it still will come this week. I still think it's going to happen, but I think they're going to honor him a little bit differently. And so once that move is done, could be tomorrow, could be Thursday, then you're going to see Tyler Lockett, $17 million in additional cap space created. And all of a sudden you're ballooning up to, what would that be? That would be almost 34 million in cap space available to you. If they restructure the Uchenna Nwosu deal, which I think we should expect. There's all the signs that that's the case. So you'd go from 34 million, potentially save another 6 million, could get over 40 million, maybe 40.5 million dollars in cap space. And then the big one that I think everyone's waiting for is the Geno Smith restructure. And or the Geno Smith extension, I should say, if that happens this week and you get the Uchenna and you get the Tyler Lockett, then you're talking about Geno would be another 24 million in cap space with an extension. And I'll explain again why if people don't really understand all the cap stuff. Maybe you don't care, but I'll just explain quickly. But again, you're getting up to well over 60, 62, 63, maybe $64 million in cap space. So the Seahawks are going to be a team with plenty of cap room very soon. And so anyone that was worried about that was wasted concern. It's not really an issue. But again, some people that are confused about, oh my God, don't pay Geno Smith 40 or 45 million. That means we can't do something else. Well, actually not extending him means that you're not going to be able to sign other people. Like extending Geno Smith clears cap space. It does not cost you cap space, at least this year. And why is that? Well, because what you do when you do that, a lot of times you tear up the final year. Sometimes there's all sorts of ways that they can do those contracts, but he will sign a lot of that money will be in a signing bonus. And that money is then prorated over the length of the deal. And lately, a lot of teams, including the Seahawks, have been doing void years. So let's say the Seahawks do a real 3-year deal for Geno Smith, and then they do 2 void years. So let's say it's 5 years in contract length. That lets them prorate the signing bonus over 5 years, and it takes the base salary down quite a bit. So he wouldn't have a $44 million cap hit this year as he's scheduled to have. He could have a cap hit in the 20s this year, maybe even the high teens, depending on how they structure it. So that is why extending Geno Smith actually allows you to do more in terms of acquiring players, not less. And that is why I think it makes a lot of sense that the Seahawks will try to do it. I will say Brady Henderson on Brock and Salk. That'd be so funny. Brock and Salk this morning. His prediction was still in the mid-30s of what the average annual value of that deal will be. I'll be really surprised if they get Geno in the mid-30s. He's going to have done the Seahawks a favor again, because I think there's every reason for him to demand 40 to 45 million. That's still where I'm thinking this deal is going to end up. But I would be surprised if the Seahawks start at 35 and Geno starts at 50 and they end up somewhere in the middle. And as I said this morning, my prediction was maybe that wouldn't get done this week, because I would bet that there might be a little bit of posturing. Who knows? It could happen at any time and would be big news for sure if that were to occur. So again, Seahawks have released Robertson-Harris. They've released George Fant. They've released Rayshawn Jenkins, and they have released Dre'Mont Jones. That has cleared about $27 million in cap space. They are now $16.5 million under the cap. Okay, so that's the updated news. The Dre'Mont Jones signing, I think I want to take a minute on, because I think there's he's going to be a guy that a lot of people point to as a really bad deal. Well, I already saw on Twitter someone say they should have signed Zach Allen. This is a great example of the fact that narratives form without all the information, and they assume that they place blame or they assign blame to the Seahawks in the front office, or that they made the wrong choice. The Seahawks actually tried to sign Zach Allen. That was their number one target. Zach Allen chose to sign with Denver. That could have been because of family. It could have been because of relationships. It could have been because of geography. It could have been because of things that had nothing to do with money or how well the Seahawks did in trying to recruit him. He chose to go to Denver. The Seahawks then pivoted to Dre'Mont Jones. And I will forever say Dre'Mont Jones is a good football player. I think he did not really ever have a chance of living up to that contract. I don't think he is a $17 million a year football player, but I think he's a very good football player. And I think in the right system, he can be a pretty big difference maker. I want to remind people that, if we look over the past couple of years, this year, as far as total pressures created, number one on the team, Leonard Williams with 55. Number two, Jaron Reed with 48. Number three, Boye Mafe with 47. And then number four, Dre'Mont Jones with 45. You may not love, and he might not be glamorous, but that's 45 pressures you're going to have to replace somewhere else, and you're going to have to generate somewhere else. That's not a simple thing to do. Last year, the year before, I should say, 2023, who led the teams in pressures? Boye Mafe had 58 pressures. Who was second on the team in pressures last year? Dre'Mont Jones with 43. So I think that his legacy in Seattle will always be this kind of negative view, and people will kind of be sarcastic and take shots. That's not my perspective. I thought Dre'Mont Jones was he was a good, maybe very good at times, player for this team. I think the change in defensive philosophy last year with Mike Macdonald did not really fit. As I told you on, might have been show 1 or show 2, of Hawk Blogger Mornings, I went through and showed you the weights of all the edge players, the defensive ends, nose tackles of Mike Macdonald's teams, both in Baltimore and in Michigan. And he doesn't do 280. He just doesn't. He doesn't have guys in the 280 to 295 range. He does over 300 for his defensive linemen, and he does under 270 for his edge players. And Dre'Mont Jones was he was asked to cut weight. They played him at a edge position, what they called the rush end or something. I don't know what they called it. But in any event, I think it was, asking him to do that when he's been an interior defensive lineman is asking a lot. And I think it worked a little bit, but it wasn't great. And so I'm happy for Dre'Mont Jones that he's hopefully going to be able to go someplace that suits his skill set a little bit better. Don't be surprised if he ends up being a good player for another team, because he is a good player. And it didn't work out here, and it wasn't worth the money that he was being paid to keep him here. So, good on the Seahawks for not falling into sunk cost fallacy and, keeping that contract on the books longer than it had to be. Let me remind folks, if you haven't already, give the show a like, click subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. We just passed 15,000 subscribers. We're on to 16. I'd love to get to 20 as soon as possible. Let's just keep growing this show, growing the community. And, I got some advice that I really should try to go to the annual league meeting, the owners meeting that's happening at the end of this month. I'll tell you what, these aren't cheap trips to make, and I'm doing my best. Also, juggling family responsibilities, being away is not easy, but you guys helping to grow the show is a big part of how I can cover the team more. If you liked the combine coverage I gave you last week, if you liked the fact that Nathan Ernst was able to come with us and we're able to do that, you guys are a big part of how that's happening. And if you want more of that, the more you can do to support the show, the better. So patreon.com/hawkblogger is a great place. Being a YouTube member is a great place, or just giving the show a like and clicking subscribe. All right, so let me get to the depth chart as I talk to you about this. And I will share my screen. Where do I have it? Is this the right one? I think this is the right one. Okay. So this is not a beautiful view, but you should be able to see this just fine. I'll just make a quick side comment here. I mean, wasn't it a year or two ago that they were begging, they were saying, hey, you pay upgrade to use Gemini and all the AI stuff. And now I feel like G Suite and everywhere else is begging you to use, please, God, use our AI. I'm I don't want to use your AI. Just get out of my face. All right, so this is just a rough look at depth chart, and this is not perfect, but this kind of gives you a representation of what's going on. In red are players that are no longer on the team. And that does not mean they couldn't come back to the team, but they are not on the team. And I'll look through. It's possible I missed somebody or mischaracterized somebody, so call it out if you see a mistake. But this is important when we look at the defense in particular. This was a really good defensive line last year. And now you're talking about pretty significant changes to that defensive line. So you still have Leonard Williams and Byron Murphy, which is fantastic. After that, not a lot, guys. Not a lot. So you've got Mike Morris. Who else is on that roster on the defensive line? Now you could say, well, you could get into guys like Quinton Boana, who is, you know, he was a practice squad guy for them. Sometimes he was on the roster. I'm looking through some of these other names. I mean, there really just aren't that many others. I mean, that really even qualify as being defensive linemen. So this is kind of it for your defensive line. And I would say, expect obviously that Jaron Reed is going to be re-signed. I think that's likely that he will be re-signed based on what Mike McDonald said this past week at the Combine when I asked him about it. But, I still think there's a chance Roy Robertson-Harris comes back at like $2 million instead of $6 million. I think he's a good fit. I think it's going to be hard to find a player that's as valuable as he is for as cheap as he will be. So I still believe there's a decent chance Roy Robertson-Harris may come back to the Seahawks. So I think these two could be back. I also, as we've talked about, this is a really deep free agent class in the defensive line. There's a lot of options out there. They could sign somebody else. They could go in the draft. There's a lot. We've talked about it plenty. There's plenty of defensive tackles available in this draft class. So they are thinning this out. I will also say, as much as I love Mike Morris as a guy. I've been really hoping he breaks out as a player. He's kind of the reason they had to go get Roy Robertson-Harris. His play strength was not there. He was getting pushed around. It was not great. Oh, the other guy that I'm missing on here, by the way, is Cam Young. I knew there was a name that I was missing. Cam Young is still there. I think that's, again, Cam Young and Mike Morris are the reason that they had to make these other moves. I don't think those guys have necessarily showed that they're ready to step forward. I hope they are. I hope they do. Mike Morris was like rehabbing last year. Hopefully this year he's just getting strong and he comes in and makes a big leap. That would be great. But I don't think you can count on it. I think there's a massive, massive gap between these two guys and Leonard Williams and Byron Murphy and Mike Morris and Cam Young. It's just a huge, huge gap. So, expect Jaron Reed to come back, and then it's going to be interesting to see what they do to fill out the rest. Okay, rush edge is what they used to call this, or what they called it last year. Dre'Mont Jones was listed as the starter there, but for what it's worth. The other, they call it Sam here, but the other outside linebacker that was a, rusher, Uchenna Nwosu. Well, Dre'Mont Jones is no longer on the team. And by the way, Dre'Mont Jones did play inside sometime too. So he's another, fewer, let's actually look at that real quick. I want to take a look. How many snaps did Dre'Mont Jones get on the interior last year? I bet it's over 150. But let's be sure. Let's take a look. Snaps by position, all positions, 2024. Dre'Mont Jones got he got 24, 37 plus 24. So not quite 100, I don't think, right? Right around 100 snaps on the defensive line as opposed to outside linebacker. The bulk of his stuff was at outside linebacker. So less than I would have thought, actually. But in any event, that's still snaps that you're going to have to replace on the defensive line. So what I was saying here is Dre'Mont Jones is no longer here. Uchenna Nwosu, they did not make an announcement about Uchenna Nwosu. I don't think that means he's safe. I don't think it means that anything's finalized. I do think that they're still working through that. I would expect to hear maybe a restructured deal this week with Uchenna Nwosu, and we'll find out what happens there. then what you're left with is Derek Hall and Boye Mafe as the only essentially sure things on the outside, the edge player part of your roster. I think that means Uchenna Nwosu has to be retained. I really don't think you can go into the go into free agency unless you're planning on signing an edge in free agency, and that's an expensive thing to do. Like, I'll tell you a guy that like is an under the radar free agent that I like, who's a rush edge, is Dennis Gardeck, who played with the Cardinals. Super productive pass rusher, never going to be a pro bowler, but you could get him probably relatively cheaply. I just don't know that that's the best thing to do. But I think you're going to get Uchenna Nwosu back. I think you're going to have Boye Mafe and Derek Hall. But the point being is Uchenna Nwosu has a little bit of leverage right now, because I don't think, you look at that roster, I don't think you want to drop. Look at all the guys that are already in red on the front four. And or front five, if you want to think about it that way, you add Uchenna Nwosu, that's a lot of turnover in that group. So I do think that they want to bring him back. Obviously, Ernest Jones, I've got listed here. He is a free agent. I do expect him back. I don't know if it's going to happen this week. I'm not sure it'll matter that much. But, if they can't come to an agreement this week, they'll see what happens in free agency. I continue to believe that Ernest Jones really wants to stay in Seattle. I don't think he wants to move his family again. I think the Seahawks want to keep him. I think that that's going to lead to a deal. When? I don't know. But I do think pretty confidently that that's going to happen. So then from there, now Rayshawn Jenkins is no longer on the team. So at safety, you're talking about Kobe Bryant, Julian Love, Jarek Reed, AJ Finley was a late addition that they added. I think that group, I really like Jarek Reed. I think he can step forward. I think very highly of him. I still think they're going to go out and draft a safety. Maybe they will sign one in free agency so they don't have to feel beholden to the draft to take one. But they can also sign a free agent after the draft, maybe go bargain shopping a little bit later. Maybe there'll be some late cap casualties in June, which sometimes happens. So not as big of an issue here, but still a little thin. And defensively, this is, Trey Brown, Rayshawn Jenkins, Ernest Jones, Dre'Mont Jones, Jaron Reed, Roy Robertson-Harris, Jonathan Ankins, no longer on the team, period. Now, it doesn't mean that they couldn't come back, some of them, but as of now, those guys are not on the team. So I think the biggest red flag here is this front five, the defensive tackles and the edges. That's thinned out quite a bit. So we'll see what happens there. I still think that they very much could add. Offensively, we know Stone Forsythe and Laken Tomlinson are gone. I don't think I've got George Fant listed here. Let me put him up here. I don't know why I didn't put George Fant up here, but he is also goner. So you really, from a swing tackle perspective, you're a little thin. Like, your only tackle behind Charles Cross and Abe Lucas is Mike Jarrell, who, while I love Mike Jarrell and he'll be in his second year and hopefully he'll take a step forward, you got to have additional depth at tackle. So I do think swing tackle's a need. I think you could go there in free agency. I also think it's a very smart thing to look at in this draft. I think there's some tackles you could take later in this draft that would actually be a really good addition to develop behind Charles Cross and Abe Lucas. There's also some guys, as you know, that I've wanted to take maybe even early if you can get an Armand Membu, which I think is unlikely, or maybe a Will Campbell, which is also maybe unlikely. Those guys could easily swing out to right tackle if you needed them to. I'm going to talk to somebody tomorrow, confirmed, so the show will start at, what time will the show start tomorrow? Show will start at 7:30 a.m. tomorrow. Dane Brugler will be on. I'll be talking to him about the draft and the combine and all that thing. And then at 8 a.m. Pacific time tomorrow, I'll be welcoming Jonas Avanaya from University of Arizona onto the show for a conversation to go over, his experience at the combine. He's a guy that played right tackle. I see him pretty much as a guard. But man, that guy is an amazing athlete at 325, running the way he did at the combine this week. He did well for himself, and he's a great guy too. So looking forward to having him join the show. So we'll talk to one of the guys that maybe could be in the mix for a backup tackle if necessary, but also a starting guard. So here you go. Noah Fant, notably, not listed, and I still do not believe that Noah Fant is going to be cut. I thought I would personally release him and save the additional money and get to other tight ends, but it does not look like they're going to do that. I think Noah Fant, AJ Barner, Brady Russell are there. A position that I don't have listed here that you could add is fullback. And I think Brady Russell is probably the initial leader in the clubhouse for the fullback position, but I think that's also a position group that they will be looking to add to going forward. So let me go ahead and put that here for the time being. So that's kind of a look at where the depth chart is after these moves. I think that looking at, I think people are saying there might be other things coming. So let me just take a quick look, see if there's any more news coming. As of now, yep, all this is stuff we've already talked about. Bob Condata is reporting that the Dre'Mont Jones release is a standard release and not post June 1st. So all of that, as opposed to splitting it across 2 years, they'll take all the dead money hit this year for that move. Otherwise, nothing else that I'm seeing that really qualifies as new news beyond what we've talked about here. Let me see, are there any super chats or any key questions? I think we're good there. Double checking. Yeah, so I think that's it, guys. I think that's where we are. I think that, again, the Seahawks are in position to clear up as much as, $62-63 million in cap space after they say goodbye to Tyler Lockett and extend Geno Smith with the moves that they've now made. I don't know that there will be that many more beyond that. As I said, I don't think they're going to extend DK Metcalf until later. And I don't think there's any other moves I would be expecting in the near term. So Uchenna Nwosu is the only other thing that I think we're kind of keeping our eye on to see what happens there. And again, the expectation would be a restructure there, not a release. But we will find out. Jacoby does a super chat, says, do you see Robertson-Harris getting re-signed? If I were to bet on it now, I would. I'll stick with my prediction from this morning. I think he's a super valuable guy, and I think that they can find, a couple $1 million to throw his way, but it may be later in free agency after he finds that there's not as much of a market. And it depends on what he wants too. I know his wife really loved it here. Don't know if he felt the same way. Maybe he, going from Jacksonville to Seattle is a big shift. Maybe he wants to get back to the East Coast or the South or any number of other places. If that's the case, then, there's not much the Seahawks could do other than pay him all the money that he was owed on this contract. So if all things are equal, I do think he will be back, but I think it'll be at a much lower price tag. All right, folks, thank you for tuning in. Hopefully you enjoyed that. Make sure you give the show a like and click subscribe. Appreciate all of you. And I see some of the questions that are being asked in chat are things that I already talked about. So make sure you rewind to the beginning, start over, and I will address pretty much all the questions you've got about players that were moved, what the cap space is, players that have not moved yet, and what I expect to happen going forward. All right, take care. I will see y'all soon.